Hello, hi, what's up, everyone? It's me, Karen, your favorite booktuber, and today is a big, exciting day because I have the pleasure of chatting with poet, writer, and astro queen Emmalea Russo, whose debut novel, Vivienne, came out last year and is just now available in paperback as of June 24th, I believe. And I had the pleasure of reading this book earlier in the year, and it was one of my favorites because it is something that talks about some of the most important things in life: art, creation, and the soul. And before we dive into things, I'm just going to give you a brief overview about Vivienne, this wonderful novel here. Vivienne is a story of a former muse artist who now lives a somewhat lifestyle of obscurity with her daughter Velour and her granddaughter Vesta. Her work is about to appear in a group exhibition, and a little drama occurs. She gets canceled, and we're kind of following this cast of characters and their paramours for about a week. Emmalea, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the great summary.
Of course, of course. Okay, to kick things off, I'm pretty sure in the novel, I was trying to look for it, but I couldn't really find it. But I think you did mention that little Vesta is a Virgo. And
yes, great job catching that. Yeah.
Yes. And I just wanted to ask, what's your big three? And did you ever consider what Velour and Vivienne's sun signs were?
Great question. Thanks for starting off with that. Yeah, because I think I mentioned her birthday is in September or something. Like I didn't directly mention it, so yeah. That's good. That's a good catch. I'm a Virgo, like Vesta. I'm an Aries rising and a Taurus moon. What are you?
I'm a Virgo sun. I'm a Cancer ascendant and then a Sag moon.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel fellow Virgo. I do feel like Vivienne has a lot of like Virgoan themes throughout. So that was I was like, I wonder if anyone, I think you might be the first one to catch that. But yeah, I definitely thought about her sign as kind of being emblematic of her whole vibe. Like she's this very precocious child. She's kind of also a little old lady in some ways. And I was thinking of her name, of course, Vesta, as being related to the Vestal Virgins who kind of kept the fire of Rome going and had to sacrifice any kind of sexual life. So I think of Vesta as like a little bit of a nun almost, but also there's something mischievous about her, which I think is like the Virgo dichotomy, like curious, mischievous, and also a bit not showing all the cards. In terms of, you asked about Vivienne and Velour's signs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is actually something I do with my clients a lot. We like make charts for their characters. I often work on creative projects with them astrologically. And I had in mind for Velour an Aquarius. That was like the sort of archetype I was thinking of, a little bit distant, and a bit like, at once interested in like the past and the future. She's like a kind of quiet scholar of her parents' work, but she's also, she doesn't seem to get too emotionally attached to things, at least on the surface. Kind of airy. There's something sort of ethereal, airy about her. And I was thinking of Virgo for Vivienne, but she's a bit more amorphous. I feel like she could be many different signs. Did something come to mind for you?
I definitely do think that there's something about Velour that's kind of distant, and I think she's very much so like on her own path. So I think Aquarius is a really good match for her. I was thinking that maybe Vivienne could be Scorpio.
Yeah.
Like she has that intensity to her, and I mean now we're kind of seeing her at the end of her life, so I feel like she's really like processing the life that she's lived and is like considering this next voyage of her life.
Certainly. And I think like with the Scorpio theme of like sort of the death rebirth stuff, I think that's all tied up in Vivienne. But I also I think of Virgo and Scorpio as like secretly almost like twin signs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we both have an intensity. I think Scorpio kind of gets that, like, everyone is always like, oh, Scorpio is so intense. But I also think Virgos are very intense, but just in a way that's like more, as you were saying, they keep their cards close to their chest. They're a bit more secretive about it.
Yeah, there's a hiddenness to both of the signs, a secretiveness, because they both rule these like inner processes that we don't see. Like Virgo rules the digestive system, which is both interested in like purifying, and also obviously one has to get really contaminated and kind of in the muck of things. So they're interesting, like underworldy signs in their own weird ways. Yeah.
Once I found out that Virgos rule the digestion, I was like, this makes so much sense because like as a child, I was someone whose stomach was like very sensitive. I would always get like an upset stomach, and I was like, this makes sense.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense, and also like the whole like Virgos are anal thing, you know, like critique.
Yeah.
It's like the editor in every way, like kind of mental and physical. Yeah, no, I love that you started out with that. Thank you.
I'm glad. I like to like start everything off with a little fun question. I think that was perfect for a lot of what this book is about. Okay, and so we have these three female characters, and I kind of found myself thinking about the crone, the mother, and the maiden sort of archetype. And I was wondering if all three characters came to you at once, or was this triad a sort of later addition?
Absolutely. I was thinking of the maiden, mother, crone as well for the three women. I think of them almost as like obviously their own discrete separate entities, but very much like one apparatus or something of the same entity, and or different expressions of the same energy. And Vivienne came to me first, and then her descendants, but I knew they all had to be bees.
Yeah. Have you ever read Lapvona?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember when Otessa Moshfegh was doing a lot of interviews around it, she was kind of talking about the letter V and how she kind of thinks it's like an evil letter, and that's why the evil guy in that book, his name starts with V. Yeah, so I was just like, oh, it's so interesting because I don't think that the women in your book are evil, but they definitely have like a sort of darkness to them, like they're willing to see both the light and the dark.
That's very interesting. I hadn't heard the evil V, but of course, yeah. It's a sinister letter, and it sounds a bit sketchy when you say it. It's sort of like a deformed U.
Yeah.
And there's like the valley of it, like you're going somewhere. And it's also, I think, a kind of feminine evil because it's a bit discreet under the surface, scorpionic, and also like I think, you know, there's definitely some femi evil in these characters, like
Yeah.
And even the feminine evil of the internet, like all the shit talk.
Definitely. Okay, and so considering that you just mentioned the internet, there's something about this novel that is an internet novel. Like we have these YouTube comments, we have these Twitter posts, and it's like it makes a reading experience very dynamic. You're moving through it super fast, like you're on the edge of your seat, being like, okay, what's going to happen next? And I was wondering at what stage of the writing, drafting of this, did you include the YouTube comments, social media stuff? How did you settle on the form and structure for the novel? And were the tweets something that you added later, or like how did that go about?
It's a good question. Yeah. I think the comments came first. And I originally thought like, because I had written mostly poetry prior, so I thought, oh, I'll write a book in comments. And very quickly that became, you know, not the book. And I was realizing that I needed scenes and this and almost a way to ground the book in order to bring those comments into like their own vibey extreme. So they came first, but then then the rest of the world filled in around them. And I was thinking very much of like the Greek chorus, like but internet Greek chorus, and also in terms of the form and the way that I settled on how it's set up, I knew that it had to be very quick in the beginning, like thrown into it. And I realized, well, actually these comments, these kind of quick clips from the internet could set up a story really efficiently in a sense and like catapult the reader right into it. And I also knew I wanted Vivienne to be seen like first from the outside before we go into like her home. So you kind of get this sense of like she's a bit of an icon or a mysterious figure. So yeah.
Definitely, that makes sense. Okay, so I feel like this novel, it's mixing the body, the soul, and the internet all into one. We have a character that we are introduced to later on in the novel called Lars, and he's like a New York City gallery owner. He has some disordered eating. And then we have Vivienne, who's just an avid churchgoer. And these two people, like, you wouldn't expect it, I think, especially of Lars, but they're very much so concerned with the soul and almost like the afterlife. Lars is concerned with growing a soul. Vivienne is stewarding her soul. And I think at one point Lars says something about how, referring to Vivienne, she's kind of like a saint or maybe just a boomer. She gets that the internet was real. And then I was kind of just like wondering how do you see the internet changing our sense of the soul and the self?
Oh God.
Kind of a big question.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, Lars and his disordered eating. I think of Lars as a Gemini, by the way.
Okay, that's good to know.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, with Lars, I really wanted him to be both like kind of a bit of like an opportunist and a schemer, but also interested in transcendence. I wanted him to have this like paradox about him. I didn't want him to be like a straight villain. Even though people have come to me, it's interesting. He's the character people have the most like extreme reactions about. Like people are like, I love Lars, he's my favorite, or like he was awful, it's so annoying. And I think this now I'm like totally in another land. Where what the hell is the question?
Oh, I was wondering about this, the internet and the soul.
Yeah. So I mean, how does the internet is well, I think of soul. I mean, there's like, I don't even know how to define soul, but it's certainly this kind of like intrinsic but inexplicable thing. And it has something to do with interiority, I think. And I think in some ways the internet can strip us of that because we're asked to put it all out there and like immediately make an image or a public thing of something that might otherwise stay inward and have the opportunity to grow in weirder ways or more, you know, I guess soul feeding ways. So I think it can be a bit of a soul suck, but I also think it's like in a sense unavoidable. And so it's a bit of a pharmacon. I think it's like both poison and cure, because I think there's a lot of weird connections obviously that can happen on the internet. And I think Lars's character, there's like a kind of reckoning that happens because he kind of goes into this with the idea of wanting to make a bigger name for himself and like almost capitalize on Vivienne's cancellation. And he kind of gets changed in the process. I think he kind of falls in with the family, falls in love with them in this way. And the women kind of overtake him and disarm him. But then some weird shit happens. So I don't know what happens to Lars's soul particularly. That's a good question. It's kind of to be determined. But I will say I'm just finishing my second novel, and Lars returns. And
I was wondering if the second novel was going to pick up from some of those characters. So that's good to know, because I was like, I want to know more.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's a different time. It's a bit of a flash forward, but yeah, some of the characters, actually many of the characters return. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know.
I feel like they wouldn't let go of me. Like they just, I needed to keep hanging out with them.
Yeah, definitely. Their journeys aren't over yet.
No, and there's more soul shit.
Good. Yay.
Some more stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a question I think a lot about. Like, I mean, even just seeing images of ourselves or constantly reading all of this information that is really disparate and jarring. Like, what is it doing to us? It's working on us in some way. But I do think the growing of the soul or growing a soul does require some level of retreat, or, you know, it doesn't face publicly in a way. So I think that's part of the tension in Viv.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that makes sense. I kind of think there's a way in which like the soul is something we can't really put our hands onto. And in the same way, like the internet isn't either. They're just like both these very like airy sort of things. They're just like up there out of our grasp.
Well, art as well, I think it's like, it's unclear, you know, we can't really nail it down. And if we do, something else happens to lift it up.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to Velour. I think she's kind of a tricky character. She's grappling with the loss of her husband. She's never recovered, I think, from the loss of her father. And I think she also feels very much so at odds with her daughter and her mother, because they have such a very like tender, beautiful bond. And she's very much so like devoted to this idea of her parents' work, and she spends a lot of time researching, writing about them. And I think it's in contrast to Velour and Vesta, who are just like so bold and creative. And personally, I kind of was like, I think Velour should do the artist's way. Like, I think she mentioned there.
Yeah.
And like once Velour starts posting Vivienne stuff on YouTube, it seems like that is her act of creation. But it's one that stems from, having access to the archives. And she's not actually creating something. She's kind of just posting. And I was kind of wondering what's driving her inability to create or even share the writing that she's been working on for so long and so diligently about her family. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
That's a really interesting question. I think Velour is, I think she's a bit stuck. And I think she's very melancholic. And I think, she wears the same outfit every day. She wears her robe, her velour robe. And she, I think she's sort of in a way has never like truly mourned, at least this is how I think of her, hasn't truly mourned the loss of her husband. And she hasn't truly mourned like never getting to know her father. So I think she has this relationship with these like ghost-like men in her life, but she doesn't have like a way to move past it, or she's sort of on loop or stuck creatively. So she goes back to these works that her parents did, but doesn't show them. And I think she sees it both as a kind of, I think she might see it as a sort of act of service or devotion, but also there's something a bit sinister about her. Perhaps like she's living in the shadow of these like very quirky, famous people. I think of her childhood as very chaotic, which she talks about sometimes. And so she sort of is living in constant like reverence for, but also kind of eye rolling at her mother.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So yeah. What do you think?
I mean, I kind of feel as if it's very subtle, but there is a way in which to me, it seems as if she's sort of like I think there's a lot on her shoulders with the loss of like the husband. I think there are like financial concerns that she has about their lifestyle and like what's going to happen next. And I think that, there's like moments towards the end of the novel where she's kind of like, I think there's a moment where she's looking at herself in the mirror and she sort of smirks or something like that. And it's just like, it makes you think like, oh, like, okay. Yeah. So I just feel as if, I think she's like, as you were saying, like she's not properly mourned all of these things, but I do think that I imagine growing up the way that she did must have been very frustrating and hard for her to really like cement her own identity. And as a result, I don't think she's entirely like done everything she's needed to do in order to become like, to grow her own soul, sort of, to use that verbiage, right. To become her own person, really. So she's kind of just, I think, feels like shackled almost. She deeply loves and respects the body of work her parents have created, but she also feels shackled by it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
And then considering, art is such a big theme of this book, and I think that it's also sort of connected to the surreal. And I was wondering what draws you to surrealist artwork, and how do you find that the internet fits into the surreal?
I mean, I love dreams, and this is like the, gospel of the surrealists. And I think the internet is an incredibly surreal or like super real space. So partly, I think with the comments and like starting the book off with the comments and interspersing them, I wanted it to be the internet, but not like the straight up internet. I didn't want it to be a kind of exact rendering. I wanted it to be a little bit of another world or a dream internet or something. And almost a place of poetry or the unconscious or something like this. And I mean, I love some of the surrealists, but like the main surrealist in the book, Hans Bellmer, I think is one of the few surrealists whose work is like still shocking and disturbing. You know, these like very bizarre doll sculptures. So a lot of the themes kind of rolled out of those works, you know, these kind of really in a way revolutionary, but also potentially like, you know, almost pedophilic vibe. And this idea of like the fragmented body and the body like in all these different shapes is really, you know, something I kept thinking about, because in a way there's a lot of the scenes in the book like repeat in weird ways or distort or like get rearranged in the internet comments, and like a kind of like resonance occurs, but it, you know, or maybe even like an uncanniness.
Yeah. No, definitely. I see that. I think that makes sense. Okay. We're now going to move slightly, ever so slightly, into some spoiler territory. So for people who haven't read the book just yet, this is your chance to pause this video, read the book, come back to it. But personally, I don't think spoilers even really exist, but just, I know once you finish the book, you're going to have questions. You're going to want to know more. And so we're moving on into that territory. Okay. At the end of the novel, we have a section called Afterlife. How did this ending come to you? At what, because like tonally, it's a little bit different from what we were getting beforehand. And at what point of drafting were you like, okay, we need this section. We need to go there?
Later in the drafting, for sure. I felt like there needed to be a leap that was really like both a time jump, you know, a little bit of a jump in time like you see in some movies, and also, and I was really thinking of it as a movie, like I was thinking of this in like scenes and shots, and I wanted there to be this kind of reckoning with death or what comes after this cancellation, and this, you know, because it takes place over the course of basically a week. Very fast. So I wanted there to be a kind of gap and then jump forward 11 years into a totally different landscape. And you have to kind of fill in the middle part yourself. And also, I think, you know, one thing that was really inspiring to me was like this idea of I kept thinking like a transcription, which really the final part of the book, Afterlife, it's a kind of transcription of a conversation. So there is that like recorded kind of surveillance-y aspect of it. And this question of like, what happens after the end? Like, what record is left, basically? So I was thinking of all of these things. I was also really influenced by a book I had recently read. I think it's an incredible book. Stella Maris by Cormac McCarthy. And I loved the tone of it and how slight and like almost like pared back it is, which is basically, you know, transcriptions as well. So that was part of it. And then the other part was it is kind of in a sense a book about cancel culture, but not really. I mean, yes and no, as you know. And
it's
so
but it's bigger than that.
Yeah. So I think that's part of the end. I was like, well, what would be an extreme form of this cancel culture way of relating to art and bodies and people? And that's where I went, you know, this center for constant creation where bodies are used and in very disturbing ways. And also this weird questioning of Vesta, which is kind of, it's posed as like for her best interest, you know, it's kind of this like weird emotional black terrorism where it's like, this is for you, but really, and for your safety. Yeah. It's like safetyism throughout the novel, but really it's a kind of, it's not that, it's more sinister.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. The end was very sinister. Okay. And I know that alchemy and mysticism are sort of interests of yours. And I know those are very big, heavy topics. And I'm going to say like a very simplified definition of alchemy would be like the science of transformation.
Yeah.
How do you think that Vivienne would react to how she's still engaged in the almost ultimate act of creation, which is creating new life?
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so I would definitely agree with that definition of alchemy. And also in alchemy, importantly, there's a lot of death and rebirth. And it's like this constant kind of separation and bringing together, like these, these weird pairings and then taking a part of those pairings. I don't know. I mean, that's a really, really good question. I think she would feel perhaps violated.
Mm-hmm.
And but in a way, maybe at peace with it, because I do feel like Vivienne found in the end some kind of peace, especially via that church scene. I was almost thinking of the church scene with her and Vesta, where she goes to confession, and that afterlife scene as like twins or counterparts.
Yeah.
They're both really intimate, but and there's like this question of reckoning or forgiveness almost. So I would say violated, but it's hard to say. And I think in a way, Velour could, she's a bit of a villain in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, a major villain. And wait, my answer, what was the other part of it? Was there another part?
It was more so just like, how would she respond to this? And yeah, because this is like an act of creation, but it's not one that's coming from like cognition. But there is a way in which the artist that is Vivienne will somehow, like the way I see it is, even though to be bringing up for a child to be born in this capacity is very like weird.
Yeah.
But I kind of think that like these children will be carrying on some of Vivienne. Like there will be a way in which, and that's probably why like people are drawn to the idea of like, oh, like Vivienne's womb, like that space of the womb becomes a space of creation. Like we want her, the artist, and maybe like somehow it's gonna move on into our children. And I do kind of think that like there's something there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. It's both very dark and almost like pointing to maybe some kind of post-biological future, and also I think a bit paradoxical, which is the case with like all of alchemy. Really, it's sort of both dark and light at the same time. So yeah, I think that's one way to read it. It's almost like this very odd kind of rebirth or living of Vivienne. But at the same time, pointing towards potentially this future of like relating to the body as the book is, as some portions of the book are relating to art, which is as this kind of commodifiable utilitarian designer baby-ish thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit, I don't know. Yeah, I think you're right. I think I was thinking also of the ending as paradoxical, and I think maybe that's why it seems to, aside from Lars, the ending is the thing that people have most been divided over. A lot of people were like, what the fuck? And some people were like, oh, it's the best part of the book. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, it's not what you expect, so it comes as a bit of a surprise, but I do think it thematically ties in with a lot of what we were talking about. And I just want to say one more thing is like, you mentioned how you think Vivienne would be violated. And I do like agree with that. But then I also think that there's a way in which there's two things. One, she's like so kind of old and just doesn't really care about anything. So that she's probably just going to be like, whatever. But then I also think that I've been reading a lot about Christianity. I was reading this book, Christianity, the last 3,000 years, something like that. I forget who wrote it, but it was a really big book. And it talks about how the early years of Christianity are like very much so concerned with, even though Jesus says like, let the dead bury the dead, Christianity becomes a bit of a death cult where the body's like being buried and considering the afterlife are very important and central things. So I almost like wonder how Vivienne, like as a Catholic, would sort of like respond to this from that angle versus the one that's like, she doesn't really care about what's happening.
As a Catholic. Right. Yeah. I mean, well, this question of like, what is the definition of death even? Is she dead?
Yeah.
Or is she not? I mean, and I do think there's something about I think there's a real like resonance between like the womb and the tomb or the coffin. Like they're dark spaces of they're hidden spaces of potentially rebirth. And in terms of like Christianity, I was actually thinking a lot in this novel about early Catholicism, which is very kind of tied up in paganism and like the gods and nature, things like this. So and like the magic of Catholicism, you know, the transubstantiation, the bread into flesh, all that stuff. So I don't know. I think, how would you think of it as a Catholic? Probably maybe from that magical angle, but I think she would think of it as a dark magic.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So right now I'm reading this biography on Gala Dali, and it's been like really fascinating. And the author said something about how Salvador Dali believed all art was a quest for immortality. And I don't really necessarily have a question on that, but I was wondering if you'd be able to speak to this idea in relation to the ending of the novel, and then these questions of like legacy building activities, art, and, you know, giving birth and that kind of stuff. And in relation to what's happening at the end, this afterlife.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, well, in astrology, for instance, art making and child rearing belong to the same house.
Which house?
The fifth house.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's like every kind of creation is taking place in that arena. So I do think, you know, there are many ways to kind of quest after immortality or some kind of legacy or to leave something behind. There's really also no way to know. It's also in a sense an illusion, right? Because like there's no way to know what's going to last, even if something lasts a few years or in one's lifetime, who knows? So there's a certain level of, I think in Vivienne's case, she lets go of that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes through it almost because probably because her daughter wants her to, partly because she's curious, I think, and wants to experience maybe one last hurrah. But I think she's sort of surrendered in a way and isn't interested in her own legacy anymore. So there's like a kind of peace that comes with that or something. But yeah, I guess I would agree in a sense that art and child, you know, having children and probably many other activities are quests for immortality. But maybe, yeah, in terms of the afterlife, there does seem to be in all of those processes like a kind of death or destruction that has to happen in order for the birth, or at least some loss of a sense of oneself, like at some point.
Yeah. I mean, especially because, nothing stays the same. So if you do want that next thing or whatever, you kind of have to be willing to let go of something.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think for the most part, those are all my like spoiler related questions.
Okay.
So I was wondering, before you wrote Vivienne, had you attempted to write a novel? What were some of the challenges in the process of writing Vivienne? And how would you say that writing a novel differs from poetry?
Yeah, I had written parts of novels before and I wasn't quite satisfied with them. And Vivienne kind of happened, not the writing of it per se, but like the idea for it happened very quickly, kind of quickly and suddenly when I was writing a book of poetry. Vivienne kind of appeared in one of the poems, or I had this image of an old woman that appeared in one of the poems, and I felt like there was somehow like a whole life there, or more to explore. And also, you know, I feel like it's kind of rare, I might be wrong, but I do feel like it's kind of rare for like an older woman to be like the star of a book.
Yeah, I was thinking that as you were talking.
So I wanted to kind of go there. And also reckon with this idea of like, well, how would one particular, you know, older woman's work get put through the ringer by our contemporary standards. Like, what do we do with the art of the dead or the old or things that are hard to digest? So that story kind of presented itself very quickly. I mean, it's totally different from writing poetry in one way, because it's like there's a fucking plot, which like not all novels have plots, but this one does. So it's, you know, it's a lot of like, it's a different kind of like structure and thing that happens to your brain. Just like it's different reading a novel from reading poetry. But on the other hand, there's a similarity, because I think with both pursuits, I'm like questing after a vibe. Like I have this atmosphere, this feeling, and I want to transmit it somehow. And this one just had to be done via novel. But also there's a lot of moments of poetry in the book. So I think that somehow like made me able to do it. I like tricked myself into writing a novel, basically.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
They're both like just as hard, though.
Okay. Neither is easy.
Both suck, you know. But because some people like I get questions sometimes almost like, you know, like I've graduated from writing poetry and tried like, because I think people think of poetry as like kind of small and quaint because it's shorter, which is interesting. I guess we like big stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think of them as alchemically like different materials.
When you're writing a poem, I mean, I imagine just with poems or short stories, fiction, like you could always return to it later. But is there a way in which, like, how long do you spend working on a poem? Or like, talk to me more about the creation of like poetry for you. Like, does it come from an image or certain words? Like, yeah.
Really hard. I mean, like for instance, I'm working on a book now of poetry, and it's not like I work on it every day. It's very kind of back and forth, but I think I've been working on it for like 3 or 4 years. So just like gradually. And I think with poetry, it can be a lot slower because it's almost like I'm just living my life, and then like I'll get like an image or something will catch me, or, you know, I'll keep adding to the book in that way. So it almost feels like it's like this like notes on my life or something. Like, does that make sense? It sounds a bit deranged, but it's more ongoing, and I feel like I'm always kind of writing a poem or poetry. But also a lot of my books are like book length poems. Like the first book I wrote is called G, and it's like it's just like one long poem essentially. So I think I was always like headed towards novels, maybe because I guess in some ways like epic poetry is like the OG novel.
Yeah.
So so I don't know. I mean, I think it's just in a way like how I relate to the world. Like, yeah, like little images will catch me, or a word or something. But I think of poetry more as like you have to be a little more economical with it. Obviously, you don't have as many pages, and I think it's like endlessly editable. There's something it's almost like poetry is more like visual art for me than like writing novels, because there's a lot of visual components on the page, and you're like thinking about line breaks and sounds, but also the way something looks and how certain words are positioned near other words. So it almost feels a bit sculptural, which is interesting because that's kind of what Hans Bellmer said, I think, about his sculptures. He said he thought of them as poetry, like kind of fragmented, messed up words. I'm just like, you know, free associating at this point, but that's what I have to say.
I mean, it is like a hard question, but it was something that I know, like what from being on the internet talking about books, like sometimes I come across people who are like, my favorite kind of novels are those that are written by poets. So I just wanted to get your perspective on the differences that you see between like those two acts of creation. But also I think you make a really good point when you're like, you know, epic poems were kind of the original novel, which is like, you know, now we expect poems to be so short and like very like, easily digestible almost, even though often
Instagrammable.
yeah, especially that. But like, you know, the Iliad or so many like poems from like the medieval times, like those are long stories. Like they're really long. Like honestly, the Iliad could have been edited down a bit more. But
Okay, come on, let's edit this. Let's put it through the Virgo ringer. Yeah, I mean, poetry's older.
yeah. No.
Bitches, it's older. No, I think I mean, poetry. I do think also less people give a shit about it.
Yeah.
So that's been one like practical difference. Like more people have read Vivienne. I think probably by virtue of the fact that it's a novel. Like maybe you know, it's not that it's lower stakes writing poetry, but I do think if you're writing a book of poems and publishing it in 2025 or whatever year we're in, it's like, you know, hopefully 6 people read it. You know, you're not doing it, you're not going to be on many like YouTubes or whatever.
Yeah.
Although it depends. I mean, I don't know. There's like obviously a couple really famous poets
Yeah.
who go on talk shows and stuff.
Yeah, but who knows if their poetry is you know, if we're talking about immortality so much, who knows if it's gonna
withstand, hold up.
Okay. So considering that you have this like history as a poet, I was kind of wondering a bit about when you realized you were a writer and what that sort of process journey was like.
Oh my God.
We're going back in time.
Yeah. Okay. Flashback. I mean, very young, probably. I always like had books. Like I was always a huge reader. So I think I probably felt like I was a writer or wanted to write when I started to read a lot. And you know, I was like a moody middle schooler, high schooler reading like, you know, Sylvia Plath or Anne Sexton, people like this. And I thought I was sort of astounded at how much poetry could do with so little. Such a kind of like a Virgo revelation, I guess. You know, and so I think it just became what I wanted to do. And also I think certain like personal experiences probably spurred me on further, like having seizures, for instance. I have epilepsy. So I think that those sorts of feelings that I get before and after a seizure are very intriguing and disturbing. And I wanted to figure out a way to capture those. And writing seemed not that it can capture, but it can get close in an interesting way. So I think even in Vivienne, like there's not like seizures per se, but there's a lot of those same feelings of like, you know, the sense that it's difficult to name something, or a loss of identity, a loss of self, an uncanniness, a dreaminess. I've been here before, but can't quite place it. Like those sorts of epileptic energies.
Or sort of like you're on the precipice of something. Like,
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, kind of teetering.
And then I was wondering more so on the day-to-day, do you have a writing practice? Do you writing every day? Do you have any rituals around writing? Where you write, things like that?
I wrote much of Vivienne in bed.
Nice.
That, you know, I don't know why it seemed to be the place to do it. I don't have like a
Not to interrupt you. Did you write Vivienne during the pandemic, or was it before? Or
just post? Does it feel like I wrote it during the pandemic?
No, but I was just wondering because you said like the bed, so I was like, I don't
know. Like the bed, but like right when I get up, you know, like
those early morning hours.
The special, the magic dreamy residue. Before sunrise is like, and then it's like all downhill from there. Just goes. So I gotta like get that out first thing. I don't have a writing practice, to be honest. I write when I want to. I mean, I do write my dreams down, but other than that, like I write when I need to, when I want to, when I'm working on something. Is that right? Yeah.
But that would be like your fiction poetry writing, which is like different from the Substack writing.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess I have to have I totally forgot about I forgot I had a Substack. Yes, I have a Substack and I post on it quite frequently. I had a Substack when it was like super dorky. It's still dorky to have a Substack.
Yeah.
But it was really dorky 5 years ago. We were like, what's that? You have a and now everyone and their grandma has a Substack. I think I post on it like definitely once, often twice a week. So that's helpful because lately my practice with that is like Monday mornings, I look at the astrology chart for the week. I write various things that come to me about the chart and also usually incorporate what I'm reading. So it's kind of like a way for me to digest my reading experiences and then like what's to come and hopefully help people in some deranged way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good call. I totally forgot. I do have to write a Substack very, very frequently.
Yeah. No, that's good to hear. But also because sometimes when like listening to these author interviews, like some authors can be very like precious about it. Like, you know, we need to write every single day. I'm hitting this word count. So
really, oh God, that's not me. Although, you know, I do. My one kind of consistent thing is if I'm working on a book, which I usually am in some capacity, like this is so dorky, but like I email to myself. Like I sometimes will use the notes app, but mostly I'll email to myself and it'll be like, 27 email replies to myself, like things that come to me or like a moment or something that I feel like should be in the book. And then I'll go back when I'm sitting down and we'll like attempt to incorporate those.
Yeah.
That's like the only daily writing that happens in terms of my projects. But I will say I edit like insanely, like that's where the bulk of the work gets done.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I use, like I have a WhatsApp group just of me.
Yeah, there you go.
That to like, all the thoughts are going there. Yeah. Okay. And then I was actually just wondering, because we were talking about the internet so much, when you are in the process of creation or even editing, do you feel the need to disconnect from the internet to focus? Do you feel the internet siren call?
The siren call of the internet. Yeah. Yes and yeah, I'm both. I do feel the need to disconnect, but also scrolling happens and it's harrowing and sickening. And like an hour later you emerge. So both, but I don't have like a practice where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go on the internet for X amount of days or hours. I kind of just, whatever will be. But with Vivienne, I kind of had to go on the internet in a sense because a lot of the inspiration was coming from like the tone of certain YouTube comments or certain posts. So I kind of tried to channel some of the posts' energies. Like I didn't use the words, but there's a specific kind of YouTube commenter vibe that I was trying to capture.
Yeah, and I think you captured all the various kind of YouTube comment like archetypes that there are.
Oh, good. Yeah, I looked at, a lot of different YouTubes, but often of like kind of iconic women. So like Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, for instance, like some of the comments on her is Camille Paglia, different people like that, or cancelable figures.
Yeah. No, it's actually, this just occurred to me now. It's so interesting that, so I watch Love Island, but I watch like Love Island UK. And right now this season has like a lot of drama because some of the women are being like fully faceted creatures and, not being super nice. But there's a way like when you're reading on the internet about how people speak about them or like, the women you were speaking about where they like, one, act as if they know the person. And then B, also feel as if they feel upset that the person isn't, that the woman in question isn't acting in a way that they expect a woman to act. And I think there's sort of something about how Vivienne, Velour, Vesta are three women who are very like complex and, like have that sort of evil and lightness in there that we see that in the comments as well, that people they think that they know Vivienne And they're also mad that she doesn't easily fit into a narrative.
Yeah, I've never seen that, but yes.
No, it's really interesting to like consider A, what their astrology sign is, and B, like the different ways people interact with each other.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this happens with the internet because people are made, images of themselves so easily, and we cultivate these ideas. So then there's like a killing off of what we thought the person was like. But I also think this happens in love, or other kinds of relationships, with or without the net. Like, there's almost like I was just reading this essay, and I think she literally said, like, there are two beings we fall in love with when we fall in love with someone. It's like the image in our head and the person.
Yeah.
And there does have to be some kind of reckoning or destruction of one of those. And it can be quite sad. We pedestal. But also I think a lot of great art comes from this, comes from the longing for that image and the questing after it, which can be really torturous and lovely, like the troubadours or something.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I know you mentioned that you were reading Stella Maris when you were in the process of revising Vivienne. I was wondering if there were other things that you were actively reading, or if there were certain books or authors or whatever that were inspiring or informing your writing.
I actually tend not to read that much while I'm in the thick of it, because there can be a lot of there can be some confusion. So I try to stay in the voice. So I don't know that I was reading that much while writing it, but I'm thinking, certainly all of the texts that I mentioned in the back, in my little, I think there's a resources. Wait, I'm not looking at the book. Yeah, right, exactly. Such a Virgo moves, a note section. So all of these texts and movies and pieces of art, I was looking at a lot of sculptures and surrealist works and stuff to kind of try to almost funnel that those images into the book in some way, because they're very, very dreamy and hard to translate. And then of course Marguerite Poret's Mirror of Simple Souls, which is the mystical text that Lars loves. And some of these movies that get mentioned. And also I was looking at a lot of different clothing, from different
Virgoans and all that stuff. Yeah.
Virgoans, but all, yeah. And Demilla Meester, Margiela, things like that. So more visuals really. And but Stella Maris was, and also the kind of companion book to that, The Passenger. I had taken a break from working on Vivienne, and I read those two books, and they kind of they really stayed with me. And I felt like I was kind of really under the influence of them when I wrote the final part. I don't know, I'm blanking on more. Do you have any that it reminded you of, or?
I think, hold on. I think I may have wrote it down, but I think there's a way, Melina by, I think, Ingor Bachmann, something like that.
One of my favorite books.
Yeah, I could see there's something that character is concerned with the disappearing and the appearing, and she's dealing with all this. There's something there, but mostly I did think that this was very singular, in that it has that edited quality of that you mentioned, that poetry kind of does. It's quite succinct and to the point, but it captures a lot. And so I actually think, when I read this, I was like, why aren't more people reading this?
Yeah, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. So no, I thought I couldn't really place it within this, because I do read quite a bit of contemporary fiction, so I couldn't see it within that context. But I think your reference list did help to be this is what this is in dialogue with, which I appreciate.
Yeah, medieval references, and also, I mean, Melina it's a really good comparison. I think someone references Melina in the book, actually, or not Melina, but Bachmann. And it's also a great movie. I don't know if you've seen the movie. It's really freaky. Which Isabelle Huppert, really good. Yeah. But thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. And yeah, the paperback, I think it feels pretty good. I have it here.
That's
It's like, wait, is it in frame? It's
Yeah.
like, I kind of like the paperback better than the hardcover.
Well, I think I
Like,
also like, yeah, the being able to bend things is quite nice.
Yeah.
But I like that this has like a good amount of space in there as well.
Yeah, there's some space. Yeah.
I like that for my eyes.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. All right, I'll give you that. There's some space in here too, though. There's a lot of white space, as we call it in the poetry world. It's definitely a poet. I mean, I don't know if it's a poet novel. That's interesting. I'd have to like think about other poet novels or, what did you say? People say my favorite novels are novels by poets or something.
Yeah. Because I think they tend to make the case that like poets are so considered with their language and like.
So right. Or maybe just because they're short.
Yeah. Okay. So then I was also thinking more contemporary, like what are you currently reading? Are there any authors or books that you think should be on our radar, either new releases or backlist stuff? Put us on to something.
Well, I'm reading a few. I just got in the mail a few books from my publisher, Arcade, and I think they're all quite good. They're among the stacks, a stack of books that are holding up this conversation.
Yeah.
Matthew Gazda's book, The Sleepers, Noah Kumin's Stop All the Clocks, and then Friedrich Barthelme's collected short stories called The Great Pyramids, with a really cool introduction from Bret Easton Ellis. So those are like the three that I'm about to read. And then I'm also rereading Anna Kavan's book, Ice.
Oh, yeah.
She's really weird. I really like her. I feel like more people should read her. And then what else is under here? Oh, one of my favorite poets. I have a couple books by her here. She's a contemporary poet named Cynthia Cruz. Anything by her. Especially the book Ruin, I would say, is the best. Yeah. Yeah. Other than that, I mean, I read a lot of like psychoanalytic stuff, like Freud and Jung and people like that. Very weird.
But I think it makes sense with like Vivienne and the sort of considering the inner self and stuff. So it makes sense.
Yeah, it's tracking. True.
Yeah. And so I do know that, like, as you mentioned, you're reading like Freud and all these things, and you do have this interest in like alchemy and stuff like that. Is there right now like a certain topic, time period, or weird niche that you're like diving into that's been occupying your mind?
Ooh. Topic, time, weird niche. Well, I mean, for the past like many months, I've been thinking about like the intersections of astrology and psychoanalysis because I'm teaching this like year-long course.
Oh, yeah.
Once a month we get together and there are different topics. Like last month we talked about the planet Saturn and like Freud's ideas about melancholia. So I like, I'm in that weird niche, I guess, right now, and always kind of half reading something psychoanalytic and something astrological, which feels funny and kind of blasphemous because Freud was like so anti-astrology. But of course, Jung was like hardcore into it and said like, if I had 30 more years to live, I would spend them studying astrology. So I like that, that intersection. What else? Time periods. I don't know. I'm looking at my books right now. I want to read more contemporary. You know what I've been doing? Maybe this is like a thing. I don't know. But my husband and I have been listening to like, you know how you get like a preview on Audible, like 5 minutes of a book? We've been listening to previews of like contemporary novels to see
which one.
Just like, to get like to take the temperature. I think we did that with like 10 the other day. So I like that exercise a lot.
Yeah.
It's intense because you kind of have to make a snap judgment after like 4.5 minutes, but
sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah. Next.
Yeah. Okay. And then I do know that you mentioned that your next piece of fiction that's coming out, that's going to be somewhat in relationship to Vivienne. Can you remind us what the name of that work is, when it's coming out, and anything you want to reveal to us?
The Moon Papers is the working title, coming out in a year. So June or July, sometime summer 2026. It'll be a little bit of a, I'm thinking of it as like a, because it's coming out in the beginning of the summer, as like a schizo beach read.
Okay, I love that.
It's a bit about, it's about surveillance a little bit, and vision and seeing and different ways we kind of clock each other or don't. And it's like Vivienne, it's kind of like an art novel that's maybe more open about the fact that it's a sci-fi novel. I feel like Vivienne's a little bit of a secret sci-fi novel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that's exciting. I can't wait. And so finally, thank you so much for this time. This has been so lovely chatting with you. If you can let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, the people can find me on Instagram. It's my only social media, just at my name. There might be a dot in there, at Emmalea.Russo. And my Substack, emmalea.substack.com, which I forgot about. And yeah, my website, emmalearusso.com.
Okay, cool. That sounds good. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you so much. This was great.